This is Your Superior Self, episode 68, Helping Humanity Evolve, with CEO and fellow human, Chris Yoko.
But a lot of times whenever you're younger, you think like, oh, I'm going to find that one perfect thing that makes me super happy. And what you start to realize is like the more I do a thing, the better I get at it, the better I feel about doing it. And you kind of back your way into the things that you realize you're, pretty talented and gifted at. And then you become much more passionate about doing those things. So sometimes it's not necessarily about like hoping to stumble upon the thing that's magically going to make you feel great and help you have that impact in the world. But sometimes it's about, finding something you can really dedicate yourself to. And even if it's a lot of hard work initially, knowing that work is worth it. And I find that if you have that end goal in mind where you're like, I'm going to do these things and that's going to leave this world a better place for, other people, for future generations, for my kids, for your kids, for whatever the case might be, I think that's a really good place to start.
What is going on, Superior Nation? Welcome back to Your Superior Self, the podcast that wakes you up, that helps you get motivated and to get you inspired to move forward in your life and to help you with self-mastery. I'm your host, Trey Downs, and have you ever had like the worst week of your life? Like just things kept happening and you finally get to do something that you love and care about as far as your passion project. And that's me right now. This week has been incredibly hard for me. Just one thing after another, and to be able to record this right now and just kind of get in my feels. It feels good. It feels really good. And I want to read something that has inspired me this week to keep going and not to give up. The book is called The Motivation Manifesto, and it's written by Brendon Burchard, and he is easily becoming one of my favorite authors, and I highly suggest that you go pick his book up. And in the book, he says we must keep the big picture in mind. 1 million dreams have died because compromising souls repeated the lie of the weak. I'm okay with putting off my needs and dream another few years because people need me. Shall we do nothing but reply to the needs of others all day until in the day's final hours we retreat to our beds exhausted by the madness, not one step closer to what we wanted in life? So that we can sleep restlessly only to awake once more in a world determined by others rather than by ourselves? No, let us not compromise our dreams or border our destiny hour by hour. If we can see a dream in the distance, let us move toward it with a real force, will, and consistency. And I needed to hear that this week. It seems like life was testing me all week, like little things turned into big things, and it just turned into resistance. And our dreams are our dreams. And you have to remember that you're going to have to put a lot of work in to get to your dream. Like you envision your dream and where you want to be in the future. You have these visualization practices and you see yourself in 5 years where you want to be. But you have to realize that you are who you are now. And in order to be in that vision and to be at that goal, you have to change. You have to work on yourself. You have to keep leveling up. And I do that by consistently putting myself in a state of pain, right? So I just did my 30-day challenge of running. It's something that I hate to do. Running and I do not get along whatsoever. I hate it. But I figured if I can do something straight for 30 days that I hate, it's going to level me up and put me in a different mindset. So that way I can take that momentum and put it to another area of my life and create success in a different way. Now, I did 30 days today. Today is my 30th day. My challenge has been expanded to 60 days. I am going to run continuously. Well, not continuously, but 60 days straight. And that is my goal. And I hate running, and it's not going to be fun, especially in the northeast summer with the humidity and the temperatures rising as we get deeper into summer. But if I can push myself and I can callous my mind and build a different mindset, I can apply that energy. I can apply those tactics of getting leveling up my mindset to different areas in my life. And I think you should be doing this as well. I really do challenge you to do something for 30 days that you ultimately just hate, because that builds your mindset. It makes you kind of become aware of what else is out there for you as you accomplish things that you never thought you could do. Like, it gives you this confidence. It's like, wow, like, what else can I do? And that's exactly what I'm doing. I just, like I said, I just completed 30 days. I didn't think I could do it. Now it's like, what else is in there? Like, what else can I do? Why am I limiting myself to these beliefs that I can only achieve to a certain level? Like, I can go beyond that level, and I can 100% take my ass to a new level. But the problem is, I don't know where that ceiling is until I get there, until I get to that point where my mind wants to quit. And it is in that moment where you have to say, I'm not quitting. I don't care. It's when I'm running. And when my body starts to ache and I start getting like cramps, and it's like you can feel the heat, and you're running uphill and your body hurts, and you're like, why am I doing this? Why are you doing this? And you have to answer that why. My why and why I'm doing this is so that I can build a stronger mindset. I am doing this because I want to. I want to challenge myself. I want to see how far I can go. How many levels can I level up? And you have to figure that out for yourself. What is your why? And what are you going to do to level up? And to help us level up today, our featured guest, Yoko Co, is joining us. I'm excited about our conversation. He's a great dude. He's a great father. He's a great entrepreneur. His company, Yoko Co, helps organizations that are focused on building a better world to do it more quickly and efficiently through their branding, website, content, and web presence as a whole. Chris is also the author of the Yoko Manifesto. You can find that manifesto at chrisyoko.com. He has some blog publishings over there as well, and you can find his contact information if you guys want to reach out to him. His social media links are up top. You can click on those and be sent directly to his social media following. I'm pretty stoked about my conversation with Chris, so without further ado, here is Yoko Co. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Your Superior Self. Tonight, I'm excited to have Yoko Co on the show. He is a CEO, and I am currently looking at his webpage, and I've read his manifesto. If you haven't, I suggest that you go do that right now. He has some interesting thoughts about the world in general. His name is Yoko Co. You find him at chrisyoko.com. Chris, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me, Trey. Appreciate it, man.
So what are you up to today? What do you got going on?
We are, mostly just getting into, life is always a whole bunch of learning by trial and error. So more learning and a couple of opportunities for growth kind of across the board, including professionally as far as our team. So working on a lot of that stuff.
And we talked a little bit before we went on air, but tell the people, what is your niche? What do you do that separates you from everyone else?
So in terms of what we do organizationally, we really feel like there is a desire for people to feel impact connected to their work. I think you and I met through Joe McClinsky. So if, people know who he is, it's a lot of stuff that he shouts about as well. But it's, I spent a lot of time through high school, college working construction. And while it's like hard work, at the end of the day, you get a chance to turn back and look and say like, oh, before this was an open field and now we poured a foundation, we framed a house. Like I can see what I've done and I can see the impact that has, and I can watch as it becomes a full-fledged house. I can watch people move in, and I got a lot of satisfaction out of that. And I feel like now that we do, like so many people do so much work, at their computer, you can come in for days, weeks, months and work on the same project and, be in and out and not see the real impact you make. And so one of the things we try to do organizationally is help organizations understand how all of the things they do on the platform that connects them with the most people anywhere, their web presence, and usually starts with their websites and then expands to social media, video content, stuff like that, is being able to help them understand the impact that has on their clients and align that with what they do as an organization, align that with how their employees work, and get past those kind of vanity metrics to the real stories that help them understand that impact, to give them at least some kind of feeling like I had whenever I was, getting done wrapping up on a work site and being able to go, oh, the work that I did made this thing happen. And that's a great place to be. And so whenever you start to feel that and see that, you can start to understand the type of impact you have on the world, and you can start to be more conscious and more intentional about having a greater positive impact on the world. And those are the types of organizations we work with, and we help, do their thing.
So what was your position when you were doing construction? Were you a laborer or were you a foreman?
Oh, I was a laborer, swinging a hammer. That's about it.
What? So doing construction, and I know a lot of my listeners can relate, but maybe they can't. But if you ever done any type of construction work or laborer type of work, the stories that go along with that are tremendous. Like some of the everyday stories.
Oh, for sure.
Just bonding with your brothers that are doing construction. Some of the jokes, some of the teaming up on one another. Like what? All right. So I think you become a leader by surrounding yourself in those type of environments. You really learn about teamwork, and you learn what a real leader does, because one. And some people might not agree with me, but you go to work and you show up with a bunch of guys, and you got your loads, and you got your, when I say loads, the guys that kind of don't work at a pace that you do. And then you got your guys that are out there working pretty fast. And as a leader in that type of environment, like those are your friends. Like you have to separate your friendship and where you're at in that company, or even like a laborer, and say like somebody's not pulling their weight. So many lessons you can learn from just those types of jobs. It's incredible, because if something can go wrong, like you're out there working construction and you might have a disagreement with someone that you're working with, like it can get pretty nasty. It
can get physical. It
can definitely get physical. Like it's not like the corporate space where you get a reprimand or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to go complain to Carol in HR. It's like, no, somebody might swing at you.
You're definitely going to come out with a black eye or something like that. Like, what was your biggest lesson in leadership when you're working construction?
Working construction, I think the biggest one I learned, I worked with a couple of different crews, and there were some that were a little bit larger, and there were kind of these, the owners of the company or whatever, and they would kind of come by and give people, a lot of crap about like, sure, you got this done, but you should get these 10 things done or whatever. And then they hop in the truck and they go to the next site and they do it again. And then with some of especially the smaller outfits I worked with, the thing that was really inspiring is, they're there right next to you, swinging a hammer, popping the nail gun, doing whatever needs to be done to get things basically completed on time. They're working really hard. And I naturally gravitate towards those people that kind of lead by example. So if you're in the trenches, or, whatever the appropriate metaphor might be for where you work, and you're really in there and you get what people are going through on a daily basis, obviously you're going to be able to relate better. And people are going to be more willing to, I think, take advice from you because they realize you're in it with them. You're not just kind of looking down or driving somebody without any understanding of what they're going through.
How important is respect?
When probably
it comes to leadership.
It's huge. I don't think you could have if anyone's a leader that's not respected, I don't think they'll be a leader for very long. If you don't have the respect of the people that you're leading, they're not going to follow for a very long time. Simply being in a place where people can respect you means they're actually going to appreciate the advice you share, come to you for counsel, do all the things that you want to do from a leadership position. Whereas, if they're not respectful of you, they're going to go around you, circumvent. And I think, it's not going to take long for you to find yourself undermined or out of a gig.
Yeah, but there's always that leader. I guess there is a difference between a leader and a manager. So you have a leader.
Oh yeah.
I guess the biggest difference would be respect, right? A leader gets respect, but you can also have a manager can be a leader. But there is definitely a difference.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think, you can have a lot of people that have the title of manager. People can have a manager or boss that they think sucks. But I think all of us can think back in our careers. Like I can think of times whenever I had bosses that I certainly wouldn't consider leaders. And there are times that I had peers in those same environments that I considered them more of a leader than the person that had, a quote unquote leadership title. So in my estimation, those two things aren't necessarily synonymous. You can definitely be a boss, a manager, a VP or whatever, and not really be a leader. And you can be a leader and not have the title that reflects that.
So I'm just scrolling through your website here, and a lot of your viewpoints in life, I totally agree with. So in one of these highlights here, it says we must support companies that gladly accept the role of custodian. What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, it's a big topic to unbury, but I think one of the main things we don't take into consideration, and this gets like a little hippie preachy, so bear with me, but is a lot of the growth we drive now, basically comes at a cost, whether it's the cost of the actual people, and environmental cost. Like obviously, if you're just digging up a whole lot of fossil fuel, like that's great. It's a lot of energy, but it's not an endless supply. So you're making a withdrawal from somewhere. And what we want to do is look at organizations, understanding that companies and industry has the largest footprint in terms of climate change. Being able to accept the role of custodian and understand that that's going to be something, our planet is kind of our most valuable asset. Not a whole lot of companies going to be doing much work if we have kind of a environment that doesn't function any longer. So understanding that we're all in that together and putting in protocols, processes, and just a culture in place that respects the environment and seeks to be, as least harmful as possible, and ideally, turning things around and becoming beneficial to the environment is a good first step, especially as we begin to see more and more of the science unfold in that regard.
So going with that, like, what are you gonna teach your kids about living green, and what are some of the types of the values that you want to teach them?
So a lot of it is, we're reading them a bunch of kid books. I've got, as we discussed earlier, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And so we read a lot of books on leaving the world a better place than you found it and what that looks like. So a lot of it is not being wasteful. A huge one with like little kids is obviously just like eat the food on your plate for the love of God. Some things like,
if you can get them to eat anything, that's
yeah, exactly. So, and then, whenever you spill blueberries, they'll gladly eat them off the ground. So who knows? But a lot of it is, just not being wasteful. A lot of the things that we practice in our house, we purchase energy from renewable sources. So like we opt into those plans and really try to minimize our impact and minimize waste and, encourage purchases that are reusable. So just kind of the little things that we can do on our own, with our yard, a lot of like composting wildflowers, et cetera, just stuff like that make a small but incremental difference. And if a lot of people are doing those things, it definitely adds up and makes a big difference. But then understanding like the real big impact. And I think Bring Your Kid to Work Day is coming up at the end of April. And so I'll be bringing the 5-year-old along. And one of the things I try to teach her through a couple of the meetings we'll have with different clients is we work with organizations that promote conservation. A lot of organizations that work within the Amazon, Andes mountain range, a couple different reefs across the world, and how important those ecosystems are in protecting them. And then some others that are developing technology to help remove carbon from the atmosphere. So while prevention is a huge thing, also being able to invest time and effort into things that help reverse the effect that we've had. And I think that's probably going to be, at this stage of the game, like one of our best bets, is really moving in that direction where we can adequately remove things. And those organizational impact, that's a way bigger impact than we can have personally. So understanding, hey, it's all about aggregate impact and do what you can personally, be a model and signal for others, but also understand that, the really big components of impact come from what you can do whenever you team up with lots of people, which is why organizations exist in the first place. So just trying to find organizations that are conscious of that.
So like somebody listening to this that might not be conscious to your movement or some of the things that you're doing, like what's one easy thing that they can do to start living green and being more conscious to the environment?
The easiest one is so many, especially like major metro areas, have options for you to opt into renewable energy. It costs like a cent and a third or something more per kilowatt hour or something than the traditional cost. And some programs that can't do full renewable, you can purchase renewable offsets, and they'll basically use the extra money to invest in basically getting more renewable energy. So if you want to really make a simple difference that takes all of like 30 seconds to implement and costs you very little and makes a big difference, especially whenever you roll up and consider all the people using the utility, if they were doing that, how much quicker that would be adopted, that's a super easy one.
So give me like one example of that, because I'm an idiot.
So like here I live out in Virginia, so we've got Dominion Power. You can log into your Dominion account online, and they've got like a little option right there in your settings that says like, oh, I want to opt in for the renewable energy program, and it basically says if it is or is not available in your area. And if it is, you basically flip the switch and it says, great, all the energy you purchase will be directly derived from renewable sources. And you're good to go. It costs, I think, an extra $10 a month or something like that for us.
So you say you use compost. Do you make that yourself or do you buy that?
Yeah, no, we do it ourselves. So like a lot of like non-wheat, non-meat, non-dairy food waste, you can throw into a compost pile, and then, rather than having the landscaping guys come out with a whole bunch of topsoil, you can have them dive into the compost. Or if you're a gardener, obviously it's super great for gardening, or even if you just manage flower beds and stuff like that, rather than having to go buy compost or manure, you can make it yourself. And then the nice thing about that is if you have it, basically, if you throw like those old like food scraps, an old salad, whatever, into a compost bin, it breaks down differently than if it's in a landfill where it doesn't get any access to air. And if it doesn't get access to air, it basically, I think it breaks down, I forget the term, it's not anaerobically, but it puts off methane. Whereas if it's in like a smaller compost pile where it gets broken down and turned over regularly, it doesn't necessarily put off as much methane. So, it's a little thing you can do that, again, just helps reduce that impact.
So Chris Yoko's yard is smelling great in the summertime.
Oh, I'm sure it's, a real fantastic place to be. I imagine a lot of bugs like it, but and thankfully, I mean, I imagine if like somebody throws like some old steak or chicken or something, or an old piece of fish or eggs in a compost pile, it's going to be real nasty. But for the most part, if you break it down, with just like leaves and vegetables and old tomatoes and fruit peels and stuff like that, it actually doesn't really throw off any odor. So you're usually pretty good. I know I have to go turn it around with a pitchfork every now and again. So
Have you always been like this, or is this like recently, or when you
some
became
of
a
it's
father?
recent. Like, so my dad did it for the longest time, and I was like, oh, how gross. And then I didn't do it for a whole long time, and then I began to realize like, oh, okay, I see, why it was done and the benefit. And it also, just kind of starts to make sense whenever you especially start looking at like the full ecosystem of like, okay, I'm going to throw this away, have a trash person come haul it off, and then I'm going to go down to, the garden center and basically buy the stuff I just threw away in a plastic bag, bring it back to my place, cut that open, throw it all over the yard. Or I could have just had it there in the first place. So,
You know what? As I get older, I find myself doing this, maybe not making compost, but doing little things to help, the earth living green and using renewable energy. Like I don't know. I guess it's getting older, right? And turning into my dad.
it's definitely something. Dude, I feel the exact same way. Like a couple of weeks ago, the girls like ran outside and they left the door open, and before I could even control it, I was like, "Oh, so AC is just free then?" And I knew at that moment, I was like, "Oh, gross! I am my father."
You're like, yeah. And I think it's what else? Yeah, they leave the lights on. I'm like, how many times do I have to turn the lights off? And it's like, oh my God, I'm turning into my father. Like, this is how he felt. Like, and I wonder if when he said it, he felt like his father. Like,
I don't know
it's
how it
crazy.
happens. There's some kind of weird like metamorphosis that happens that we're not even conscious of.
I start going to bed at 8:30, waking up at 5. I'm like, oh my God. Reading the newspaper.
What the hell's happening to me?
Reading the business section. I'm like, what is going on? But I hope you guys are enjoying this show. In response to numerous inquiries on how to support the show, I've started a Patreon account to accept donations. These donations will help your superior self reach and serve more people and improve the quality and content of the show. I appreciate your donations, and you can find the link in the show notes, or you can visit yoursuperiorself.com and click the button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. Thank you guys for all your support. Now, back to the show. I don't even know where I was going with that, but your whole like manifesto, like I can get behind that, and maybe it's just, I don't know. I'm excited to talk to you about this because I haven't had anybody on the podcast, have these perspectives on the world, and what you want to change the world, right? Like that, everybody wants to change the world, but how is Chris Yoko? What do you think is the best way to go about that?
I mean, in terms of how to go about it, I think that's going to be different for everyone. Like, obviously, everyone has different passions, innate gifts. There's a lot of ways to leave the world a better place than you found it, whether it's just unfortunately in like today's world, being a nice person is like a nice change of pace a lot of times, to creating and distributing, whether it's your art, your music, storytelling, environmental conservation, inventing new things, whether it be a device, an engineering feat, a medical treatment, medicine, whatever the case might be. There's tons of ways to do it, and obviously the world doesn't work unless people are contributing in all of those different ways. But I will say, finding a way that you feel really excited and positive about is going to be a big one. And a lot of people, especially whenever we're younger, like maybe this is also part of like us becoming our fathers or whatever it is, but a lot of times whenever you're younger, you think like, oh, I'm going to find that one perfect thing that makes me super happy. And what you start to realize is like the more I do a thing, the better I get at it, the better I feel about doing it. And you kind of back your way into the things that you realize you're, pretty talented and gifted at. And then you become much more passionate about doing those things. So sometimes it's not necessarily about like hoping to stumble upon the thing that's magically going to make you feel great and help you have that impact in the world. But sometimes it's about, finding something you can really dedicate yourself to. And even if it's a lot of hard work initially, knowing that that work is worth it. And I find that if you have that end goal in mind where you're like, I'm going to do these things and that's going to leave this world a better place for, other people, for future generations, for my kids, for your kids, for whatever the case might be, I think that's a really good place to start. And, it's not real specific advice for anybody, but it doesn't have to be one of those things where you have like this predestined fate that you feel like you have to kind of, have land in your lap. It just takes, kind of a lot of hard work and some thought.
Well, do you think, do you believe in that though? Like, obviously, you are where you are because of the choices that you made, but do you think there's something else going on, like a higher power that directs us all?
I think there's something. Like, it's hard to, did you grow up religious?
Yeah. Well, so I grew up Methodist, and then I converted. I guess not really converted. I guess Catholicism, same thing. But now I'm Catholic. I would say that I'm more spiritual now than I am religious. Like I am, I'm very much into. I definitely believe in a higher power and in God, but I also believe. I don't believe in a hell. I believe that we are we are a part of God, but I feel like. So it's kind of complicated. So I definitely believe that, we have a spirit, but we also have a soul. Our soul is bigger than we are. So we're here on earth, we are a spirit, and our soul is, wherever that is, and we're a part of that, and we live multiple lives trying to gain experience for that soul, if that makes sense. But our soul is directly from God. It's kind of crazy. It's this book that I've been reading, and I can really get into it, but I'm definitely more spiritual.
No, I dig that. I feel like that's kind of a common theme. Like I grew up Catholic, and just a lot of what was said didn't make a lot of sense to me. So it's like, this person's all powerful and all forgiving, but some people are going to hell. Like there's already a disconnect there. So I think I'm with you. And what I think is interesting when you talk about, the soul and what are we, like what is this vehicle that we're in? There's some cool theories, and I don't know much more about them than just the theory itself, but of like non-local consciousness and like where does consciousness come from? Like a lot of people thought it was just the thing happening in our brain, but maybe that's just a part of it that we can observe, and there's other components of it too. And of course, people also like to just throw in like, we don't really know what quantum physics is, so maybe it's quantum physics, and that's the next form of magic. So I would say I'm not highly religious, but I do think there's something else out there. And I think a big part of our role, I think everyone has like their own like philosophy on like, why does life exist? You were flipping through the manifesto. A big part of what I think is kind of what Carl Sagan said, which is life is a way for the universe to understand itself. And I think we're still pretty early in terms of evolution, and, on a scale of like consciousness from one being, an ant or a virus or something that can just barely self-replicate, to 10 being what some people would call God, like an all-aware, encompassing being. Like we're probably on like a 1 maybe in terms of what consciousness is. And so if we can continue to push ourselves to evolve and elevate our level of consciousness and better know and understand the universe, that's going to open more of those doors and help us better understand that mystery and unlock more of what the potential of life is. So I think that's kind of my guiding principle. And I think there's definitely a lot of something else out there that's more than just what we are now that contributes to that.
No, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. It's definitely a sad story. So a guy that I work with, he lost his little daughter. She was 7 years old, or 6, 7 or 6. And he was totally, I mean, obviously you can imagine how bad off he was. And I went to the funeral and I couldn't believe it's probably the worst thing that I've ever witnessed is a child's funeral. So I stayed in touch with him and talked to him, and he found this book. It was called Answers About the Afterlife by Bob Olson. And after he read the book, like his whole perspective changed. And I was like, what? Like it's crazy. You go from this, I mean, he still mourns, don't get me wrong. He still mourns the loss of his daughter, but the mindset shifted. So it wasn't so much sad, but it was kind of like an uplifting in him. And I was like, what is this about? And I told him, I was like, I see a difference in you. I see something, a light that wasn't there a month ago. And he was like, I read this book, you need to listen to it or whatever. So I got the Audible version of it and I just been listening to it. And it's kind of woo-hoo a little bit where he was, he was like a private investigator for like 15 years. And his dad died. And so he started going and seeing these psychics and started getting, 15 years of doing this, I guess. And his investigations have shown like there is this connection between us and the spiritual world. Like, and that's where a lot of my beliefs came from, was like, there is no hell. And he's like, no, out of all of my readings and all of my discussions with the psychic mediums and stuff like that, they say there's nothing, like there is nothing bad as far as a hell, a place like that where there is suffering. There is only the light. There's only the light wherever we go. There's light, and our soul once again experiences, and it comes in this. Our vehicle is our body. We have a spirit, and once whatever it may be, the soul wants it. Whatever you're doing right now, like your soul wants that experience, and then you die, and you come up and you transfer that experience to the soul, and then you go back to earth as something else, and you gain experience in that, but. Just the different thought process, like, when I go to mass and I listen to my mom's cringing right now as she listens to this, but it's like, it just, when something just kind of makes sense and you feel it and you feel this light inside of you and like just listening to this book. And I highly suggest everybody go out and listen to that book or read that book, because it's just a different point of view. I mean, there is a huge galaxy out there. There is just, we are this small thing. We are just this small being. And to think that, and in the Bible, like, trust me, I'm very spiritual, whatever, I believe in it, but it was written by man, and the church was created by man. So you have to take it for what it's worth, but spirituality is something higher than us. And I don't think there's any one wrong, I guess, belief. It's whatever makes you feel good at the end of the day. It's whatever makes you the best version of yourself at the end of the day. That's what I believe. Yeah,
I mean, I think it hit the nail on the head. Like, whatever it is you might believe, if you're not hurting somebody and it's making you a better person, by all means, go with it.
I mean, it's such a long rant. I don't mean to like take away from you, but that's just like, it's just crazy. There's no right or wrong. Like, it's just everybody should just, like you said, there should be no hate. You shouldn't go out and look to hurt someone.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk a little bit about the soul thing. Have you ever read a short story by Andy Weir called the Egg?
No.
It's a fascinating one. It's super short. It's really easy you'll read it in 5 minutes or something. It's just called The Egg. If you look it up, like The Egg short story, it's by the guy who wrote The Martian, but way before he wrote The Martian. It's a cool tale. I won't talk about it because I don't want to ruin it for you, but it's definitely worth checking out.
Have you ever gone to a psychic reading or a medium?
I haven't. I've heard from some people that have, but I haven't done it.
It is crazy. No, because my buddy who lost his daughter, like he went to one, and some of the stuff that they were saying, or she was saying, was like spot on. Like some of the stuff that she was saying was stuff that she could have never known, right? So I mean, it's just crazy. Like, and I've had a couple people come up to me and say the same thing. So it's just something to think about, guys. I'm not going to get into it too much more because I know that it freaks people out, but it's something to think about. I mean, it's just, hey, you know, it's not that you're trying to sin here and talk bad about a religion. It's just kind of being open to other beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we turn this interview around to? I mean, we talk about religion.
We can just go deep on religion if we want.
Religion. So what are you going to teach your kids? Like, what are you going to teach them? What kind of belief system are you going to? What type of values are you going to try and instill on them?
That's really interesting. So my wife, she grew up, very religious. Went to Catholic school from all the way from basically kindergarten all the way up through high school. So she was super into that side of things, started to see, some of the teachings and especially some of the modern positions of the church over the last few years is something she didn't really agree with either, especially around like how they were talking about certain groups of people. And so we both kind of agreed like, all right, we're going to leave that behind. And we had both reflected on, I took it was like Religion 101 or something. It was like one of the few classes I ended up enjoying in college, which I was basically just taking because I had to take it as a gen ed. And we explore all these other religions, and I was like, oh, this makes sense to me, and I like this bit of this, so I'm going to take that into my personal philosophy. And then I began to realize, like around here, again, I'm in Virginia, just outside the D.C. area, so there are it's a great mix of people. It's a great hub where people are coming in from all over the country, people settle down, people are coming from all over the world, people settle down, so you have this nexus of all these different thoughts and theologies and religions and everything that come together. And so at one point we just reached out to a bunch of different friends on Facebook and said, hey, we want to do kind of a religious tour with our daughters. And we originally tried to do it whenever my youngest one was 3 and we didn't have the second one yet. And she was too young to get it or appreciate it. So now we're booting that idea back up and, we'll basically try going to, go to temple, go to synagogue, go to some ceremonies from a lot of different religions and give, her a chance to kind of taste them and understand kind of what each one holds and take some of the wisdom from each, but understand that, kind of like you were saying earlier, there's not necessarily a right or wrong. There's a bunch of these different opinions and, take the wisdom of the world with you. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of, at least giving some choice and trying to teach, that there's not exactly one dogmatic position you have to follow, but there's a lot of really good ideas out there that you can have influence and, kind of point you in the direction you feel is right for you.
Oh, absolutely. My dad, he always said that everyone deserves to be loved. And that's it. Like you go your whole life, it doesn't matter what you believe in. As long as you believe in that statement right there, I don't think you can go wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's also so much harder to be upset with somebody or hate somebody when you know their story. And so being able to just mix yourself into all these different places and talk to people of different backgrounds and everything, it's one of the reasons people say travel is so good for you. It's just, it starts to break down those walls. You understand where people are coming from, and then it's hard to blame them for, they want this thing because this was in their backstory. And so of course they do. And so it makes it a lot easier, I find, to have, a dialogue or a discussion. There's, a saying, and I don't remember who brought it to my attention, otherwise I'd give them credit, but we judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge others by their actions. So the more you get somebody else's story and you can kind of see into their intentions, like, oh, they might have done this, but they were doing it for this reason or because they meant to do this, it starts to make it a lot harder to be, upset at anybody.
Interesting. Do you do much traveling?
I try to do more of it. I am not a very well-traveled person, to be honest. So I'm looking to do a bit more of that.
Where's the furthest that you traveled?
Oh, I think the furthest I've traveled
Ocean
is either.
City?
I was a little better than that. I've at least made it to both coasts of the States and up to Canada, but I think that's pretty much about it as far as distance goes.
I went to Thailand for a month, Bangkok, and it's just like the movie The Hangover. Let me just tell you that right now. It is legit. It is legit. So yeah, it's so crazy. How old are you?
34.
34. So I'm 35 now, so I'll be 36 in May.
Okay.
It's crazy, right? So we talked a little bit before about leadership, and I guess we're right on the cusp of being considered a millennial.
Yeah, we're the elder millennials, I
We're
believe
like the
we
old guys, losing our hair. Well, I'm losing my hair. I don't know about you, but losing my hair and complaining a lot more.
complain a lot more. I get the gray beard, so you'll take the top, I'll take the bottom. The face will even out there.
My wife was taking pictures of my head the other day and was like, "Hey, can you see this?" I was like, "Why are you doing that to me?"
Was my self-esteem too high? You had to bring me down a few notches.
I know, right? She's like, "You're supposed to get better with age." I'm like, "Come on now." Like that's
She's like, you've been really up on your high horse a bit here. Let me
I
knock you
know,
down a few pegs.
I know. She's like, I've listened to the podcast. You're getting a little cocky. Here's a picture of your bald spot. So talk about the leadership stuff with millennials. Like, do you think that millennials are natural leaders?
I mean, I think there's a lot going on with any generation. I mean, I think there's certainly a lot of people that can lead. I think that there's probably a little bit of a misnomer of, and I don't know if it's more like, I don't know what the generation ahead of millennials is called, if it's Gen X or whatever it is, but I think somewhere around our age range, like there was this like misnomer that like leadership was like, oh, I'm in like a position of power and authority, and that was like a thing that was highly sought after. Like, it was idolized in all like the 80s and 90s movies for a long time. So I think there's this skewed opinion of like leadership is like climbing to the top at all cost. And I will say I even know that there's this in myself, which was wanting to be at the top without really putting in the time or learning the lessons. And I don't know if that's like a sense of entitlement, but I remember even the places I was early in my career, I was like, I've been here like 4 months. Why am I not running this joint yet? And then there's people there that have been like, yeah, I've been here 20 years. Like, maybe give yourself a little bit of time. And I do feel like there's a lot more of that. And maybe some of it rightfully so in the way that work is changing. But I also think it's like, my personal opinion is that it's probably also a really negative thing, because it's leading people, I think, to jumping around a whole lot more before they can really appreciate, what you get as you put time and effort into something over a really long period of time. But with the future of work and the way things are changing, there's a lot where, it's kind of like everything is going to be maybe a project-based economy. And so maybe bouncing around a whole lot and being able to lead a project is a really effective way for what the future of the economy looks like. So I can argue it both ways. That's probably not real helpful for our conversation, but...
Well, I had Dr. James Kelly on last episode, and he made a really good point that I didn't even think about before, where millennials, some of the younger guys and girls, when they're starting to come into the workspace now, and I've got a couple of them that work for me, and they are quick to give their feedback, right? They're very quick to talk to you and give you some of their opinions and some of their ideas. And I never thought about that, but when I was coming up, it was always, you don't speak unless spoken to, and you don't give your ideas, and you don't do anything without earning your stripes first. Right. And Dr. Kelly said, the millennials are growing up, and because of social media and the way that the internet is, they're so used to immediate responses and immediate feedback from messaging and Facebook and social media that it carries over into the workspace. And I was like, wow, it was like my mind exploded. I was like, you're absolutely right. Like, that makes total sense. Like, I didn't have that. Like, when I was growing up, it was I think it was like AOL Messenger, but it was still dial-up, so it wasn't like it wasn't that cool.
Yeah, I remember. The away messages.
Yeah,
passive aggressive away messages. Good times.
Yeah, and then I'd go grab a sandwich and put up an away message, and hurry up and come back, and then be on the computer for another 24 hours.
No, absolutely. And the social media thing I think is really interesting, because I do think there's a lot of interesting fallout from it that I think we're just starting to see like the real impact of. But everything from wanting that instant gratification, and like, are we conditioning people to be really whiny? Because like, you can call a customer service line and ask for something and get the runaround for hours and hours or days, or then you just tweet an angry tweet about it and a couple of people retweet it, and suddenly like, we're sending a free one your way, keep the old one, we don't even care. And so we're just kind of conditioning people to be more passive, not really be great at overcoming conflict, but just being like, well, this is what I want, and this is the way that I want it. And not really being conditioned to have like give and take, or like the natural way to actually go about solving conflict. And yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting thing that kind of plays out, especially as time goes on. We did I was interviewed with the BBC a few months ago because they were doing an article about people getting ghosted and like ghosting in the workplace. And a few years back, we had a guy who he's a developer. We have a lot of people that work remotely, and I think he bit off more than he could chew, and he got freaked out. And rather than just admit like, "Hey guys, I bit off more than I can chew. I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna, thoughtfully resign," he had his friend call us and basically pretend to be dead. And we went through this like whole thing. I'll make the long story short because it's a whole tale. But
No, you got to say it. You got to tell me now.
basically, so I mean, yeah. So this guy fakes his own death, and I was like, "Oh my god, that's terrible to hear." When his friend called, because I just hadn't heard from this guy for a couple weeks after he missed a deadline, and we had emailed, called. I called his wife. I left a voicemail at their home because they still had like a home line, which is an older person thing to have now. But like, yeah, just heard back from his friend out of the blue, and I said, "Is there an obituary? I'd love to be able to send some flowers. I don't know if there's a funeral." I knew his wife's name, and I had spoken with her very briefly. So I said, "Should we send somebody to their home?" And he's like, I'll see if I can find the obituary and I'll send it to you. He's like, "But they need you to send like the tax forms to this address." And I was like, "We understand I can't just update someone's tax forms because some guy called and said like, 'Hey, I'm so-and-so's friend and you need to send his very sensitive tax documents to a new address.'" So I said, "If you can send me an obituary and like a statement from his wife, then, I'll look into it." And we hang up and I was like, I got a really weird vibe off that. And so I go look him up on Twitter, and sure enough, like 15 minutes prior, he had posted like a picture of him responding to, I think it was like a cousin or a niece or nephew or someone that was like, "Hey, are you coming to family get together?" And he's like, "Not only am I coming, I'm bringing this." And he's holding like a jug of booze, and he's pointing at it in a picture that he attached to the tweet. And so I screenshotted it and I sent it to his buddy, and I was like, either really good news or something to be super concerned about. Jason seems to, or this person seems to be doing whatever. I don't owe him anything. Jason seems to be doing okay. I think we're gonna be all right. And
He's back from the dead.
Yeah, I was like that, or I'm starting a new religion around this guy.
Yeah,
and
right.
yeah, so sure enough, I go back and I check 10 minutes later to see if he's updated. And of course, I'm telling like everyone on our team, like, check this out. And, then he was like, "Oh, this account is password protected and I've been blocked." And this whole thing. But the reason I bring it up is, there's this like ghosting behavior, and people are getting so uncomfortable with conflict, especially in the workplace, that the reason the BBC did the interview was they were talking about a company in Japan that basically you pay this company $500 and they'll quit for you. So rather than have to deal with like the anxiety of having the quit conversation, you pay them and they do it for you.
Holy crap. My sister could make a killing doing that because she used to break up with all my old girlfriends for me.
I was like, that would never work. And everyone I've talked to so far has been like, "Oh, I'd pay $500 to have someone quit for me. Absolutely." And I was like, "Oh my!" Like, maybe we need to start that up here. Like, what are we
seriously
doing?
Like, that is insane. Like, that's a great idea.
Yeah, so that blew my mind. But it just shows, like, I think people are really uncomfortable with conflict, and we live in a world now where you can totally avoid it. Like, even if you have a disagreement with your surfer or something, you can tweet about it or you can get Postmates. Like, you never have to interact with the same person again for the rest of your life if you don't want to.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the people, you complain about something, Amazon sends you a new outfit or something, you complain about something, you get 2 pair of new shoes. It's crazy.
Yeah.
What about like you, like with you being the CEO, like how do you deal with customer service now?
We try to focus really heavily on customer experience. We follow a guy named Joey Coleman. If people aren't familiar with him, you should definitely look him up. He does some awesome work in like the client experience space. He's on our advisory board and has done some amazing work with us just to try to be really mindful of understanding and honoring what's going on in other people's lives, and understanding that like anything going on in someone's personal life is something they bring with them to work. So just treating them as like a counterpart in a project or a customer is not really honoring the whole person. And so we try to be really mindful of, what somebody's going through, and we tend to be a little bit more self-oriented in periods of conflict. So meaning we take on probably more than is our fair share of responsibility if something goes wrong. But I think if you live in a world where, both people tend to do that, you're going to be in a happier place than a place where people point the finger externally and say like, "Well, this is your fault. Well, this is your fault." So we try to be really mindful of that. And I would have never thought this, but thankfully, I grew up from a divorced family, and maybe this was true or maybe it wasn't. I felt like I had to play kind of go between in a lot of really sensitive emotional discussions between my parents. And that's helped me really kind of understand and read people that might be having very different opinions about what should have happened or what should be going on, make sure they both feel heard and find some common ground, and help move things forward. So I think that certainly helped. Us feel a little bit more comfortable with conflict and understand that conflict is going to happen, and it's just something you need to be able to address and be comfortable with. But I found that's not as common a skill as I initially thought.
Yeah. That's who did you live with?
My dad, actually.
Really? Did you feel guilty at all?
No, I never felt really guilty about it. My mom lived nearby, so I still got to see both of them quite a bit. And whenever you get raised that way, you don't necessarily have enough comparison to know what it's like anywhere else. Like, you have a couple of friends, a couple of them have divorced parents, a couple of them don't, and you're just like, all right, that's the way things are. Did
you feel guilty choosing living with your dad as opposed to your mom? Like, why'd you live with your dad?
Oh, I was too young to have a choice. That was something they decided on.
Yeah, I chose my parents divorced, and I lived with my dad. And
interesting. We're both in a huge minority, or a small minority, I should say.
Yeah, I did that because I knew that I could probably get away with more over there. So, I think it was. Yeah. So it was crazy. So my parents got divorced, and I think it was like 12 years old, and my dad wanted to take. I think my dad. It was like probably a year after he got divorced, and my dad was going to some trip somewhere. I can't remember if it was Tennessee or somewhere with my uncles, and he wanted to bring me. And my mom was like, "No, if he doesn't," because I had a brother and a sister, so there's three of us. She was like, "If he doesn't take all of you, he's not taking anybody." And I was like, "This is bull crap, man. Like, no, this is terrible. I'm gonna go live with him because I'm not missing out on the next trip. I'm telling you right now." But I mean, I felt guilty, but of course, I don't know. I don't know about you, but it's like, as a 12-year-old male, you crave, I did at least crave my father's love more, just because I wanted to, I craved his attention and I wanted his approval. So that was another aspect. I mess around about going, I wanted to go on world trips with him, but we never left, Delaware, but, that's one of the reasons why I did. And I was interested. I was just wondering and curious if that was the same for you or not.
Yeah, I mean, so I was a little bit younger whenever they split, so I didn't really have a say in it. But they, we got to do kind of mixed time, and there were kind of pros and cons to each. I don't necessarily know that I ever wanted to be with one more than the other, but it did start to get to a point where, like, my dad dated a woman for a while that I definitely did not like. So for like that period, I was like, I'd like to be out of here as often as possible. And then, in terms of like being able to handle it, my mom's a social worker, my dad's an engineer. So like my mom was very aware of like what that process does to people and could talk through it very well. So I think we had pretty good balance. And then of course my dad has just kind of the cold hard logic of an engineer, which is like, all right, cool. Like, here's a problem. Here's how you solve it. Boom, we move on. So, there's a little bit of always wanting to be like, hey, look, I solved the problem too. Hey, get a pat on the back. But I don't know that there was either one that I necessarily craved more. Just there was definitely, as you get into those teenage years, like, I'd like to not be around any of you at all. Like, that would be great.
How has that developed your idea or image or philosophy on marriage?
So yeah, I mean, that was interesting. So, I definitely, and it seems like this is just a generational trend too, as we talk about millennials, but I was like, all right, like, I know what that felt like. I would prefer not to do that for my kids. So I'm going to really strive to make sure, like, whenever I get married, like, it's a relationship I feel really, I really believe in. I feel like we can go the distance. And so, my wife, Bridget, and I, we dated for 7 years before we got married, but it was through college, and you're changing. We may as well have been 4 or 5 different people over that span of time, but we were always, we grew together, and I think we became a better couple each of those iterations. And so that was something I was really trying to be intentional and conscious about. And so far, so good. I think we're doing a good job, and we try to be aware of that and talk through issues proactively. And it seems like that, combined with like a little bit more robust conversation happening in social media. So I guess there's pros and cons around like mental health and, health of a relationship and therapy not being like a taboo thing anymore seems to make that a little bit easier than I think it probably was for our parents' generation.
No, absolutely. I think we've had this awakening as a society to a lot of good things, a lot of, with mental health and some of the ideas behind it being bad and talking about it. I think it's great that as a society we're becoming more conscious to it, and it's not a bugaboo anymore.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it goes a long way. And I'm sure there are going to be the things that we look back at, just like we look at our parents' generation, like, I can't believe you did that or said these things. And it'll be interesting to see what those things are for us. But progress is good, and it tends to lead. What's that Martin Luther King quote in the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, or something like that. I always like that quote, and I tend to believe in it. I think the better we get as a group of people here on this earth, the better that'll be.
So how can people connect with you, Chris?
If you want to get a hold of me through the web's the best way. So pretty much just Chris Yoko on any social platform, or you just hit my website, chrisyoko.com, or if you're interested in what we're doing professionally, it's Yoko Co, so like YOKOCO.com, and that's us. So
let's say at the very end of my show, I have like a little words of wisdom, or like a little kind of a pep talk, or fire me up session. What would you say to someone listening to this podcast right now who, let's just say they're a millennial and they're not quite sure how to be the leader that they want to be? Like, what would you say to them right now?
Go out and talk to people. I give this advice all the time. I have a ton of people that are, either in college or coming out of college. They're like, oh, how'd you get where you are? Like, what could you do to accelerate that journey? And the thing so few people consider is just reaching out to people that are in positions you think you'd like to be in and talk to them. You'd be more than surprised how willing they are to basically give time to coach somebody that they kind of see themselves in, where it's like, oh, if I could have given my 20, 21, 22-year-old self some advice on how to avoid some of the mistakes I've made over the last 15 years or so getting here, I'd absolutely do it. So find those people, reach out, whether it's a Facebook message, an email, whatever, ask. Don't get discouraged when a couple of them don't respond to you. Just keep putting the message out there and have a couple of conversations. Surround yourself with great people, and good things are going to happen.
Where do you want to go? Like, what is your goal?
So it's an interesting one. Without getting too deep into the topic, I know we've been talking for a while. I feel like each of us is kind of born with a bit of like existential debt. I think it makes sense for us to want to be, just by virtue of our existence, like we owe it to leave it a better world than we found it. So the way we're trying to do that through my company is we want to positively impact the lives of 100 million people by the end of 2020. We seem like we're pretty well geared to do that. And so that's kind of one of my main things. And then in terms of like my goals, another big part of it is really to be focused on conservation and sustainability is a huge thing with me, and being able to really kind of spend some time helping other people understand that, foster that in others, and hopefully that has a compounding effect.
His name is Chris Yoko. Chris, I want to say thanks so much for coming on the show and helping us become our superior selves, brother.
Oh, for sure, man. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
I want to say thanks to Chris Yoko for joining the show and hanging out. I want to say thank you to the listener for downloading this episode, and please hit subscribe and leave a rating and a review wherever you get your podcast from. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do that at Trey Downs on Facebook, TDowns80 on Instagram, and at DownsTrey on Twitter. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to this, and I really do look forward to these episodes. So if you guys want to reach out, you can also do that at yoursuperiorself.com. Leave a message, or you can email me. You can find my email on the website. So I hope you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you later.